Thank you, Andrei. And thank you, Gabriel, for the previous presentation on functional programming. I like it. But we are not gonna talk about coding for this session. I'm gonna give you a bit of, let's say, an overview of the RPA low-code industry that we have now in town, with which Inetum is trying to partner, moving on to partner these days. And I would like to open up the discussion on what opportunity does it bring to you, local Romanian IT developer or IT community with this booming industry. So obviously we're going to talk about UiPath, but not only. We're going to see like several startups that are progressing very fast these days, and we're going to touch base on the low-code revolution that is going on that will probably impact the way we develop many applications in the coming future, in the coming years. So maybe a few words about me. So my name is Nicolas Boitout. I'm living in Bucharest for a couple of years now. Since 2012, as you see on screen, I was part of Société Générale, the shared service center in town, and part of the IT, and progressively I worked on a center of excellence, dealing with mostly data analytics and AI, but we touch base on automation, business process automation. And now I joined Inetum Romania. So Inetum is a French company, and we have a subsidiary here in Romania with something like 500 people, consultant doing projects and having a consultant working for various companies in town. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Bucharest actually, and I'm going to talk about the companies that we have in town and how all this connect with the low-code revolution and what it can bring to you. So that's going to be the topic of today. So a bit of context. We don't talk about functional programming as Gabriel did a few minutes ago. No, so you won't get any insight on how to code, but you will get some insight about where our industry is going. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. So we have, I think, something like 40 minutes together to discover this topic. So I've been following the RPA industry for some time. Obviously, it was in Bucharest when UiPath started to boom. Had some friends who joined UiPath at a very early stage, so they became far more wealthy than I am now, and good for them. And this is what I'm going to talk about. Okay. So I think I would like to give you a bit of historical context. So we're going to start by that, if you don't mind, and then I will go back to, let's say, low-code RPA and what it can bring to you. So overall, why do we have a lot of IT industry in town? And this is part of a long-term process that lasts for over at least 30 years now. It's called the offshoring. The offshoring started from, let's say, expensive countries, Western Europe, United States, Japan, and progressively they moved, well, initially a lot to India, very early to India for the IT stuff. So that actually when we say offshoring of IT, offshoring of services, I'm not talking about manufacturing. Manufacturing, it's China. But if we talk about services, because of the size of India, it has started to be primarily in India. We have a lot of entrepreneurs there and good people that wanted to grab some of the business. But not only, we see that it went also to Eastern Europe, especially when some of the countries joined the European Union, but also to Indonesia, to Philippines, a lot of call centers in Philippines. So this offshoring activity, offshoring of services, once again, not manufacturing, went to India, to Philippines, to Eastern Europe, to now LATAM, and even if we look at the case, for instance, for France, I mean, as you can expect, French people like people who or like to, let's say, outsource activities where they can speak their own language. They're always a bit shy to speak English. They are not that fluent. Not as Romanian people, for instance, who like to speak any foreign language as soon as possible, as often as possible. So they went back to Romania, which is historically French-speaking. They went also to, now these days, to Tunisia, Morocco, which is a more recent movement. It's outside of the European Union, So of course, it has some impact in terms of GDPR and data protection and everything that we can do outside the frontier of the European Union. So that's the setup, and it has started a long time ago. And when we talk about offshoring, what did we offshore? initially, not necessarily the IT, by the way. It was not possible. The data center were physically hosted, let's say, in France, in the US, and so on. So it was not necessarily possible to outsource the IT. So what has been done is, and very, very often, the first department that was outsourced and offshore were finance department, when people are dealing with invoices, procure to pay, this type of activities. So we had also some other back office operations, and progressively, when the level of trust between the onshore, let's say a company, an international company with a headquarter, let's say in France or in the US, for instance, they had gained some trust with their companies, let's say subsidiaries in, let's say, Romania or India and so on. Progressively, they started to outsource some other activities like HR, human resources activities, know your customer, KYC, know your supplier, etc. So it's only later on that we had the development of call centers. Probably at the beginning of the year 2000, and the development of IT help desk and IT infrastructure that were progressively, once again, offshore to India with database administrator and this type of activity. And progressively, countries like India have become the specialists in terms of production monitoring, IT infrastructure, and so on. Okay, so that's the long-term movement that we have observed. And what these processes that were offshore and outsourced have in common? Actually, they are usually fairly highly manual. They are repetitive process, not extremely long running. They are not necessarily highly they do not necessarily need high computing powers and effort. So this is something that are really manual. This is more like admin task that people were sending abroad. The stuff that we didn't want to cope with anymore, let's say inexpensive cities in the Western world, that were progressively outsourced. So that's the beginning of our activity. This is true for India, but this is true also for Romania. I'm sure that you have example of people working in this type of department. They are actually plentiful in town. So if we think about Bucharest, I mean, a lot of outsourcing companies, IT outsourcing companies, are now located in Bucharest. And Dava, Luxoft, Pentalog, Capgemini. This is for the, let's say, the big ones. We have Cognizant, HSL, Wipro. So these are Indian companies that are now set up in France, set up in Romania, and we have also in Etam, so which is maybe one word about that. Waters. I think we are 26,000 people now worldwide. And we are essentially in France, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, Latam, Poland, and Romania. So here we are 500. So all these IT specialists, IT services companies are now present in town. So they follow the flow. And they follow the flow because also many international groups, once again, came to India and also to Romania. In here, I'm gonna list a few of the companies. So Société Générale, the one that I was working for a couple of weeks ago, but we have also UniCredit, London Stock Exchange, ING, Deutsche Bank, BNP, Raiffeisen, and so on and so on. Okay, so actually there are as many banks in Romania and in Bucharest in particular than there are in London. I'm half joking here, but it's clear that a lot of companies decided to move part of their activities here because we have good people. That speaks a lot of languages and sometimes with very good IT skills. Okay, so but it's not only banks. We can also think about, let's say, telco companies like Vodafone, Orange, that are also present in town with a large footprint. Okay, so this picture tells you that actually this is our story. This is our story, and you can put that in parallel with the fact that a lot of people from Romania were actually moving abroad and at the beginning of 2000. And what type of job were they finding? Essentially in the IT business. That was where, I mean, there was already a lot of need. And progressively, and the Romanian government decided to, let's say, facilitate the IT industry while people were not at that time paying an income tax. So people had an incentive to stay, and a lot of groups, instead of recruiting Romanian people abroad, let's say in Paris, in Germany, and so on, they decided to move their activity here locally. So that's a booming business. And thanks to that, I think Romania has been one of the fastest growing country in Europe in these recent years, and it's probably true for this year as well. So this is the context. And in this context, what happened, and since the mid 2010s, and we had the emergence of new startup companies that tried progressively all these business that were very, very, let's say, manual. They tried to automate it progressively, and it gave birth to the industry of RPA. And sometimes we can extrapolate and talk about business automation, and business automation like BPM, business process automation management. Okay, and this is just the, let's say, the extension, the technological extension of a 30 years trend in offshoring, meaning that a lot of work has been relocated here in Romania, in India, and in several countries where initially the costs were fairly low, the labor costs were fairly low, and progressively we had some companies that realized that these business that were in town could be progressively automated. So it's not a surprise that the leading let's say RPA vendors are now part from, let's say, so most of these companies like UiPath and Automation Anywhere, two of the lead vendors, they are American. Everyone is chasing money in the US for their growth, but they are historically UiPath from Bucharest, Automation Anywhere from India. Okay, so Blue Prism is another story. It's coming from the UK, but the two leading companies are coming actually from the cities where we had a lot of business process to automate. So they progressively developed some technological solution in order to do that. So the thing that is interesting coming back to Bucharest now these days is that we have UiPath in town, still with a major, let's say, major center, but we have also some new companies. And I'm going to list a couple of them. For instance, Druid.ai is a chatbot connected to UiPath. We have Emailtree, that is also kind of Romanian company with their headquarters in Luxembourg, but they are trying to automate ticketing thanks to their solution. But we have also some new solutions that have emerged, like FinTech OS, Floex.ai, which are kind of platform for process automation. And so it's not just like one task being automated, but it's a complete workflow that you can automate thanks to Floex.ai or FinTech OS. So once again, Floex.ai is hosted somehow in San Francisco, but actually, concretely, they are in town. Same from FinTech OS. Okay, so we can be very proud of that. I think of the fact that now in Bucharest we have a very vibrant community of startups, and I think for UiPath we no longer talk about the startups when let's say the valuation of the company exceeds 30 billion euro or dollar. Well, it's pretty much the same, which makes it the biggest startup in tech from Europe. And you know that the second one, maybe not the second one, but the largest in Germany is actually Celonis. And Celonis is similarly a startup company with valued at 11 or 12 billion euro that is doing some BPM and process mining. So similar topics, let's say, automating process and helping understand what's going on, handling its exceptions and so on. So actually, this is a booming activity. Make sure that a lot of legacy activity that we have are progressively automated because they are manual, because they are not very interesting sometimes. So let's automate part of it. Okay. So now, what I would like to address with you now that we have sketched let's say the big picture, is to see what concretely it can bring to you in your career. And I will open up to, okay, what is an RPA developer, what it brings for, let's say, IT ops, IT in charge of infrastructure, DevOps, and also touch base with the low code. Okay, that's what I want to discuss for the last 20 minutes. Okay. So what opportunity does it bring to the local IT community? Okay. So when the RPA industry emerged, very quickly they came with their own new terminology regarding the specialists. We had RPA developers, RPA ops in charge of the platform, the maintenance of the running boats, whether they are attended or unattended. We had some also business analysts and project manager that are dedicated to this type of process automation, which is a particular type of project So here we try to automate an existing process. We don't create a new one from scratch. So the business analyst and PM have a specific role here that I will briefly touch base. So it means that some profile emerge that have kind of specific. An RPA developer, for instance, historically is probably someone that is a VBA developer or an advanced Excel user using all the functions, or maybe a Python developer sometime. This type of profile, and they get certified by UiPath or by some other providers, and they can start a career as RPA developers. Okay, so this is, let's say, the historical way of doing business process automation, and these are the profiles that emerged at that time. Okay, so let's look at a very simple use case to start. It's not really deep IT, but we go progressively. Huh? Okay, so let's assume that we have someone working in a finance department dealing, for instance, with invoices at the end of the month, and they need to automate part of their workflow, connecting the invoice, let's say, from let's say a web app, or doing maybe taking all the list of invoices and putting them in the banking application to make the payment and so on. So this can be kind of repetitive. So if we can automate that, knowing that frequently we deal with sometimes systems that are a bit legacy, and companies are struggling to find a budget for this type of cost center. It can stay like that for a long time. So automating part of the workflow is very interesting. So the idea is progressively to have maybe a bot that will help on some of the tasks. It won't remove the person, that's for sure. It just, let's say, facilitating the activity of this person. So you can have a bot running from time to time, let's say once a month, several times a month, just to handle some of the tasks which needs to be very, very accurate. And you cannot mess up with the amount on invoices or the IBAN for all the. So you have all this type of tasks that needs to be absolutely accurate. While, as we know, humans are, when we deal with repetitive tasks, we are not very good. So having a attended bot that you can see on screen can be one of the solutions. So let's look at that. So the thing that is, I think, important for all the developers, for instance, in town, is that because a lot of this activity of, let's say, finance activity has been offshored or to, let's say, a country like Romania or like India, what it means that for several reasons, if you want to automate part of the workflow of this particular person, it can't be done, let's say, from Paris or from the US. For various reasons, you need to be co-located. Like servers are co-located, you need to have two persons co-located that works together and progressively do the job like that. It's a bit like peer programming in a way. If I want to draw an analogy, you need to sit next to the people with whom you are working for attending their boring workflow. So otherwise it doesn't work. For economic reason, but also because it's very difficult to apply, let's say, the ceremony of let's say, a Scrum process, having let's say daily or weekly sprint meetings and so on. It doesn't work for this type of very simple automation. You need to install the bot on the person's machine, and you need to start working. Okay, so that's the first thing. So that's why I think RPA developer, almost by definition, because all this activity has been offshored or nearshored in countries like Romania, RPA developers spontaneously for this particular type of task that are fairly easy, needs to be collocated. Okay. Second case. Second case. Before jumping to the second case, I would like to show you how concretely it works, especially now with work from home. Historically, before the COVID, when we were going to the office most of the days, I know that we were already doing work from home, but it has been extended, obviously. So initially, the people were coming with their laptop, a company's laptop, in a secure environment. They were connected by cable to this environment, and then they could run the bot from their own laptop. Yeah, so that's the way it was working. But after the COVID, obviously, these bots, they cannot stay They could, but it was not very secure and very difficult to maintain for our RPA ops. It was very difficult to maintain. So all these boats have been actually relocated from being on your machine to being on a VDI, meaning that so what it means concretely, it means that a lot of our, let's say, help desk, proximity teams in town, they need to be now fluent with what is an RPA bot, how it works, so that they can provide the maintenance that is being required. Okay. So it has, once again, it has moved from being on your machine, and when you were connected by cable inside a secure network, it was fine. But now with work from home and a VPN and so on, difficult to maintain. So all these RPA bots has to be moved to a VDI. So it means an extra cost. It means also some extra assistance from help desk, proximity, RPA ops overall. Okay. So now let's go to a more complex workflow. And here I will make probably no longer talk only about RPA, which is somehow the solution, but about BPM, which means Business Process Management, BPM. Okay. And how does it work? And this is where, if you are a BA, if you are a project manager, you can see already some new opportunities for your career. Huh? So why do I say that? Is that once again, you have a process that somehow you want to understand. There are many exceptions in this process, the way people are handling, for instance, with invoices or any type of workflow that you can think about that are similar to the one I just mentioned. So what we will do is that usually we will try to understand what's going on and understand all the exception that we have within the workflow. And we'll try also to modify it a bit. And so the point of doing some design thinking. We do design thinking on legacy, meaning that we all sit, let's say, in a room when possible, and we try to optimize or to understand and to optimize an existing process. Then comes the budgeting, and then comes let's say the IT phase, where with RPA developers, or let's say developers overall, independently on the technology that they use, they will work on automating this particular task. So it's usually a sequence of, let's say, a couple of weeks. It should be fairly fast. And then comes the deployment. And this deployment, once again, will need the intervention of IT security, IT architect, IT infrastructure. So it's a lot of people that we need to include, loop with during this last deployment, this last phase, and this can be particularly complex. So we need to train them, make sure that they understand that we have a platform where all these RPA bots will be hosted, and so that we can progressively deploy far more easily. Last but not least, data protection, which is usually very complex to handle these days now with GDPR, so that can create some extra headache. So once again, so in this digital transformation, you can think about the transformation office as a pool of business analysts, project managers that are dedicated to transforming, understanding and transforming some existing process, which are business processes, and they will work to frame it, to understand how it works quickly with all the exception. Then come the IT team that will join the project and work concretely on automating the process. And this is usually where we also discover a lot of exceptions that we didn't think about. So we shall be ready for a lot of surprises. But so here you have the complete workflow, and this complete workflow means that it opens up some new opportunities if you are sitting on the IT side. You are not necessarily on the business, but sitting on the IT side, you have BA, you have PM position that can evolve toward working specifically in the context of a transformation office. Okay, so I think most of the large companies in town have such a setup, a transformation office that allow them to progressively all the let's say the projects that are coming from onshore, they are being mastered locally and progressively transformed. So that's very important to develop all that. Okay. Something that I find a very sweet spot and very interesting for the future, especially if you work on data as I'm doing historically, is the fact that you can use a bot to collect some data. It can be in a database. It's not very it's not very maybe the most spontaneous solution to grab some data from a particular database, obviously, but it can work this way. And it can work also if you are, let's say, collecting data online from a web interface overall. And here you can use the boat to collect data and then process all the analytics, all the data into some analytics with some of the solutions that are said to be low code. And progressively, I will talk about low code because behind the scenes, that's what I'm going to talk about. Okay. So now that we have exposed one simple workflow, finance person dealing with invoices that needs, where the RPA developer historically needs to be collocated so that the automation, the project on automation can really take off. We have seen a more complex workflow which involves some transformation office people. And we saw that it started to be very complex to handle, and it requires some real expertise, especially at the last stage, the deployment part, which can be a headache if the IT infra is not aware about that. So that's a real challenge when you kickstart such a journey into automation. And progressively, when we let's say discover some complex workflow, at some point you will need some AI. So you will need some artificial intelligence. Why? For a particular some task. Some will be, let's say, related to computer vision, which is a specific domain of AI. So typically, if I'm dealing with invoices, and unfortunately I'm receiving, let's say, receipt invoices in PDF format, I will need to retrieve the information, and sometimes they can be only scanned. So it can be fairly problematic. We can have also images when we think about all our applications that are sitting into a VDI. So in this case, in order to recognize the button, the text box, and so on, that is a common task when you are using an RPA bot that goes through the UI, like UiPath, goes through the UI instead of using or going through the API, which is sometimes not possible. Let's think about that. It's not because the API may exist, but the VDI and all the security constraints that we may have will sometimes prevent you from accessing these APIs. So for automation, the only option that you have is to retrieve information that you see on screen thanks to computer vision, and the RPA providers, in particular UiPath, have now that natively embedded within the solution. But if we push a bit further down the road, what we need to do in terms of smart automation, when you need AI in conjunction with an RPA bot, and the RPA bot is like your hand, clicking and doing, let's say, manipulating on screen, the AI part is a bit like you recognizing things on the screen and also taking some decision. So the chatbot is one example. You can think about RPA as your backend and the chatbot as your front end, and Druid.ai is a good example for that. There are several like that, but I think Druid is a fairly interesting example. And if you are working for various banks in town, you know that they are already set up and working for a couple of banks in town. The same applies to emailtree.ai, which is companies where I have several friends. So they are automating your tickets. So here, your tickets, assuming that you receive them in Outlook. Okay, so let's look at how it works behind the scene. I had the opportunity to I'm going to jump directly here. I had the opportunity to deploy such things, and it starts to be fairly complex. So let's assume from now on that actually the AI that we want to use, in this case, so doing some classification on text. Let's assume for the time being that this AI is not natively embedded in the solution, is not part of, let's say, a cognitive services that is available on Microsoft Azure or Google AI, but it's something that you develop internally. Okay, so how does it work? So let's assume that you have a ticketing system on the left part, the UI that you are accessing through a UI, and for some reason you don't have access to the API. Maybe it's an old API. Maybe you prefer to let's say collect data directly from the UI. It's going to be easier, so okay. Let's assume that for the time being. Okay, so as soon as when you want to develop your own open source AI, which is going to be based on TensorFlow, Python, and embedded into a Flask microservice, fine, absolutely fine. And I think here we start to recognize a typical deployment of a Python application into a container, Kubernetes for the orchestration. So we don't have any surprise here. What's nice is that what we are seeing is that we have a new job that is opening up. So here, dealing with data and dealing with a machine that needs to statistically provide an answer, probabilistically provide an answer of, okay, I want to classify, for instance, incoming tickets in Jira or in any ticketing system according to some topics, to some teams, and so on. This is a new type of application, and it's not a simple Python-based microservice that we have here. It's already a bit more complex. And we have a new job opportunity that emerged called MLOps for machine learning ops. So you're no longer just DevOps. You are going one step further. You are an MLOps. And for the difference, let's say, between a classic application and an AI is just that the AI performance will vary over time because of the quality of the data that you're using as input. You didn't encode, you didn't bring the rules, and you didn't write them into your Python script in this case. But what you did is that you train a deep learning network, for instance, in order to provide you the answer. And so this deep neural network will progressively over time become less and less performant. And so this creates a lot of opportunity for MLOps, which is, I think, a very interesting job career for those of you who want who have already a decent background in DevOps. I think there are a lot of things that are happening. Sometimes we can talk about data DevOps, not data engineer, but data DevOps, and I think this is fairly similar. Okay, so here we start, let's say, digging more and more into IT, and this is I think an area of opportunity. Okay, so. All in during this journey, and what we are describing here is nothing else than the journey that UiPath had among other RPA vendors. But talking about Bucharest, UiPath has typically had this evolution in their solution, meaning that progressively they started doing some automation from the UI, and progressively they say, okay, no, we are not a UI specialist, but we are an automation specialist. And we automate business workflow, but we could also automate any type of workflow. Actually, there are many platforms, sometimes open source, that can allow you to do some automation. So if you think about Airflow, I don't know if you're familiar about Airflow, which is an open source solution for data processing. We have the same thing, meaning that you can think about all your process. It's not necessarily a business process. It's a data process, ETL process, and you can automate it thanks to a platform that allows you to do that. That's something that is very interesting. And all in, the RPA vendors started by saying, we have a solution. Let's look at how the IT work with their agile Scrum methodology, and we replicate that for RPA. But progressively, what happened is that they say, oh no, actually we need people on the ground who are business people to become citizen, and a citizen is, let's say, a business, I won't say business developer or business technologist, someone that is not necessarily in capacity to write some code and has no good knowledge on algorithmics, but at least they can manipulate a platform that allow them to, using bricks, using drag and drop, copy pasting, to develop their own code. So that's where the low-code platform is coming up, and I think this is where it creates a lot of opportunity for all of us in the IT. For one particular reason, is that we will not only talk about automating some existing business workflow or business processes, as we did so far with RPA, with RPA plus AI, with BPM, business process management, and so on. So a lot of acronyms. But we're going to talk about creating new applications from scratch, and this is where I want to maybe conclude this presentation is that it has been assessed that so far, since the day one of computing, 5 million applications have been created worldwide. And the expectation is that another 5 million will be created before 2025, and the majority of them will be done using a low-code approach. And I will say a few words about what is the low-code approach now. So we have clearly an acceleration. It's an exponential acceleration. Over the last, 50 years, we have created 5 million apps since maybe the 1st of January 1970. We have created 5 million apps in total, and we will create another 5 million within the next 4 or 5 years. So we have clearly an acceleration. We have clearly an acceleration of need with the digital transformation of our world. We have a lot of needs, and usually what's happening is that we don't have all the people that we need. We see that every day. There are so many jobs opening for IT, for developers, for IT ops, and so on, that we cannot cope. So how will we do with this? How can we cope? The answer will be probably technological. It will be low code, meaning that we need to make sure that people who don't have a degree in computer science, in data science, or they don't have let's say a certification, or they didn't code or learn on their own, at least they can do things so that they can progressively create application, automate some of their workflow, and do that without the assistance of a complete team of developers. Okay, so a majority of this new application will be low code. So that's the thing that is important. And here, maybe a few words just to one last word to conclude. Microsoft has proposed a Power Platform, and here usually we know about Power BI, dashboard for analytics. But you can do a lot of things next to that. You can automate with Power Automate some of your workflow through UI if you don't have API, or through API, or through connectors if they exist. You can create what they call Power Virtual Agent is some chatbot. So here we are in the logic of Druid, for instance, .ai in town, and you can create apps from scratch with Power Apps. And everything is going to be kind of free. I heard at some point that they wanted to put it for free in Windows 10 or even Windows 11. I think they will come with a small license, so it will come with a fee. But behind the scene, what they want is that we use their cloud services, Azure, of course. So that's the thing that is important. We have also some new companies that are emerging that are really dedicated to new applications, so similar to Power Apps in the Microsoft suite, with OutSystems or ServiceNow. So here, UiPath and many companies around UiPath are moving also in this direction, meaning that we don't want necessarily to automate existing business workflow, but to automate or create new applications thanks to low code. So the new revolution that is coming up is actually low code. And progressively, this is where maybe some new career will open. They will open. They are open now. Is that so far, low-code applications are being designed kind of in a innovation team, but progressively, everyone will have the ability to do that. I think this is probably the next stage for Microsoft, and the next stage in terms of IT. So don't look for the next programming language. The future of application will probably be low-code. It doesn't mean zero code. It's not. It's a bit different, but it means that you can do a lot of things assisted with a platform that helps you to create your own application. So all in, a web app will not necessarily be developed by Java in the backend and React, Angular for the front end. So, but a low-code approach can also speed up that. And this is clear that because of the pressure we have on the short number of developers and IT professionals, it's clear that we need a technological solution to cope with the booming number of applications. Thank you, everyone. I'm open to any questions.